Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche and a freilichen Chanukah. A good week and happy Chanukah. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. And it is in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'edich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long and healthy years. Being that tonight is Nittel, so we're going to have a special program, share several stories, Chanukah-related stories, which all have their own personal touch and inspiration and lessons for us. And we will resume the learning of Tanya in the coming week, the next week's program. So let me begin with a story that I heard personally from a Holocaust survivor. Very powerful story. He passed away recently, but he was living at the time in Arizona. And this is what he shared with me. I heard it in the year 2004. He was an 11-year-old child in the camps. When I heard it from him, he was 71 years old, and as I said, living in the United States in Arizona. This was in Auschwitz, Chanukah 1944. It was exactly 60 years ago he began. Time moves very quickly and very slowly for me. 60 years ago is both like yesterday and like 1,000 years ago. Those horrible days are frozen moments that never go away, yet they are also very distant and apart from another universe, another era, another world. I will never forget the last Chanukah in the barracks. Most of us were so consumed with scrapping together any morsel while avoiding the attention of the guards that we had no inkling which day in the year it was. Especially in those last weeks before the liberation, the Nazis were particularly unpredictable and cruel, and the chaos only made matters worse. Yet there were a few who always knew the exact dates. They would tell us that today is Shabbos, Pesach, and other significant days. On this particular day, a man would tell me that it was Chanukah. That morning, I went to the infirmary to try smuggling out some balm, anything to help relieve my father's open sores. His disease, I'm not sure whether it was typhus or some other cursed ailment, was eating his body away, and whenever I could sneak over to see him, I would see him silently struggling for some relief. As a child, I was completely overcome by the sight of my suffering father. That particular day, when I finally snuck over to my father's bunk, if you could even call it that, it was more like a cattle pen. He was no longer there. I became frantic. An older gentleman who I did not know, but often saw talking to my father, came over to console me. He too did not know when my father was taken. To this day, I don't know if it was the disease or a Nazi bullet that took my father to heaven. But his was a calming presence, this man, this older gentleman. Today was Chanukah. He told me that today was Chanukah and we celebrate the victory of the few weak over the many powerful oppressors. We light the candles to demonstrate that our light is stronger than any darkness. Your father would be very proud to know that you carry on his light despite the blackness around us. I was so moved by his words and all the memories it brought back from my early years in Lodz that I suggested to him enthusiastically that we should light the menorah tonight. He sort of smiled to me, the child, a smile hardly concealing his deep anguish, and said it would be too dangerous to try. I insisted and made off to get some machine oil from the factory. I was so excited, and for the brief moment I was able to put aside my grief, I slowly made my way back, so not to be noticed. to the barrack with my treasured bit of oil. Meanwhile, the strange gentleman had put together some wicks, apparently from clothing or some other material. Now, we needed fire to light our makeshift menorah. I noticed at the end of one building smoldering cinders. We agreed that we should wait till dusk, and at an opportune moment we would light our Hanukkah lights. Wait we did. As we were walking over to the cinders, a guard, one of the especially ruthless ones, noticed us and grabbed away the oil and wicks we were concealing. He began cursing and frothing at us. A miracle seemed to happen when his superior barked some command that apparently needed his participation, and he ran off with our precious fuel. The miracle, however, was short-lived. The animal yelled back at us that he will soon return to take care of us. I was terrified. The gentleman was absolutely serene, however. And then he said to me words that are etched into my every fiber until this very day. Tonight we have performed a miracle greater than the miracle of Hanukkah. We have lit a flame more powerful than the Hanukkah lights. The miracle of Hanukkah consisted of finding one crucible of oil, which miraculously burned for 8 days. Tonight we performed an even greater miracle. We lit the 9th invisible candle, even when we had no oil. Make no mistake, this man continued. We did light the menorah tonight. We did everything in our possible power to kindle the flames, and every effort is recognized by God. God knows that we were deprived by forces that were not in our control, so in some deeper way, we lit the menorah. We have lit the 9th flame, the most powerful one of all, so powerful that you can't even see it. The man then promised me, you will get out of here alive, and when you do, take this 9th invisible flame with you, and let it go free. Let it fly like a bird. Tell God that as great as his miracle of Hanukkah was, we performed an even greater miracle. We lit a candle even when we had no oil. Tell the world, show them the light that has emerged even from the darkest of darkness. We had no physical oil and no spiritual oil. We were wretched creatures, treated worse than animals. Yet we, in some miraculous way, we found a crucible where none existed in the hell fires of Auschwitz. The fires of Auschwitz annihilated not just a temple, they burned to ashes the people themselves. In the temple's destruction, the divine wrath was released on the wood and the stones. Here, they have consumed our lives. So there was no oil, not even defiled oil. No oil, period. Yet we still lit a flame fueled by the pits of darkness. We never gave up. Let the world know that our 9th flame is alive and shining. Tell every person in despair that the flame never goes out. As he finished these last words, the Nazi beast returned and viciously led him away behind one of the barracks. I made my escape. A few weeks later, the Russians arrived and we were liberated. Here I am today to tell you the story of the 9th flame. The story speaks for itself. I do remember a talk that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, gave on Zeis Chanukah in the year 5738. As Tafshil Lamed Ches, that would be the equivalent of the year 1977, as well as in the year Tafshin Mamala 5741, that would be the year 1980, where he spoke about the idea of carrying Chanukah after 8 days into the 9th day, even though we don't actually light the menorah. So perhaps we can learn from that. Being that we are in Chanukah, on a different note, before I tell some other stories, well, this is also a story, actually. As a child growing up, of course, the warm memories of Chanukah on the cold nights in New York. At the same time, you light those warm flames, the cozy homes, eat hot latkes, hesazudike latkes, as we sing in the Nigun, warm, sizzling latkes. So there was always the Nigun, the song of Haneres Halalu, that we sang after the lighting of the menorah. And it's a relatively long song. And I heard once who composed this song. It's interesting. And I was told that it was actually composed by the Chassidim of the fourth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Marash. What's the story? The Rebbe Marash, who was the youngest child of the Tzemach Tzedek, he didn't make many public appearances. Obviously, people saw him on Shabbos, but even Shabbos, not everybody saw him. And during the weekdays, even less so. So for seeing the Rebbe was a very precious thing. Hanukkah, he would come out to the lighting of the menorah. So the Chassidim decided, since the Rebbe is coming to light the menorah, let's compose a song and let's spend as much time as we can with the Rebbe. So they composed this nigun, a Neres Halalu, that goes on for a good, you could say 5-7 minutes. And after I heard this story, I said, wow, besides the beautiful nigun, the melody itself and all its components, and of course its message, the idea that it also is saturated with such love. The Chassidim wanted to be with the Rebbe and see the Rebbe. Now we look at the menorah, we look at the flames, and it says, in the Lireisen Belvad, Ein lanu reshus lishtamish behem. We don't have no permission to use them, only to see them. It's like looking at the flames of Hashem, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the flame of God. And it's also, when you talk about the Moshe of a generation, a Rebbe, is Pnei Chamos, like looking at the sun. And the Chassidim wanted to connect, to see the face of your teacher. So this Nigun HaNeres Halalu has that special effect and impact. So I thought, being that it's Chanukah night, let me sing the Nigun, and please sing along with me. And then I'll share a few stories. So here's how the Nigun goes. Diri-oy, and diri-oy, and diri-oy, and diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy, 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 diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy. Oy, and oy, and oy. Diri-oy, and diri-oy, and diri-oy. Diri-oy, and diri-oy. Diri-oy, and diri-oy. Diri-oy, and diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy, noy, diri-noy. Diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy, diri-oy. Diri-oy. Hanei Erois Halalu. Hanei Erois Halalu. Hanei Erois Halalu. Halalu. Hanei Erois Halalu. Anu maligim Nirioy, Nirioy, Niriram, 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 Bararam, Niriram, 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 Bararam, Hanerai Salalu, Niriram, Diriram, Diriraya Rananum, Diriram, Diriram, Diriraya Nanayanu, Anu Maligim, Alhani Simbi, Alhani, Alhani, She'asi Salavai Sayenu, She'asi Salavai lavoseinu bayomim ha'em bizman hazeh bayomim ha'em bizman hazeh Hey al yedei koyanecho hagdoshim 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 Al yedei koyanecho Hagadoyishim Yarararoy, yarararoy, yarararai, arararai, yarararai, yarararai, yarararoy, yanum. Yarararai, yanananai, yanananai, anananoi, yanananai, yanananai, yanarai, nanai, nanu. Yanananai, yanananai, yanananai. Ananai, 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 yanum. Didi ananai, 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 narai, narai, naru. V'chol shmei nasim echanu kanei resalalu kaideshem. V'chol shmei nasim echanu kanei resalalu kaideshem. Chol shmei nasim echanu kanei resalalu kaideshem. Kaideshem, 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 kaideshem. V'yein lanu reshus. Lishtamesh bahem, lishtamesh bahem, lishtamesh bahem. V'chol shmei nasim echanu kanei resalalu kaideshem. V'chol shmei nasim echanu kanei resalalu kaideshem. V'yein lanu reshus lishtamesh bahem. Elo lireisam bilvad, bilvad. Kedei leidei sulalel, leidei sulalel, Shimcho hagodol, leidei sulalel, leidei sulalel, Shimcho hagodol. Al nisecha v'al niflesecha v'al yeshuasecha al nisecha v'al niflesecha v'al yeshuasecha al nisecha v'al niflesecha v'al yeshuasecha al nisecha v'niflesecha v'al yeshuasecha. Again, envisioning, as we sing the Nigun, envisioning also the face of your Rebbe, being able to hold on to that. And even today, when we may not see physically, but still our minds, Chachamenu Bereshe, we see with our minds, we see the holier visage of the tzaddikim that we have known. They're etched in our memories and etched in our souls, and give us the strength to deal with even the darkest moments, personally and collectively. So with that, let me share another story. It's a story in the Gulag that we heard, and I heard from a chassid. His name was Mordechai Hansen. He himself was arrested a number of times, sent off to a prison, forced labor camp. Basically, these were in the years 1935. Overall, between 1935 and 1956, he spent 21 years in Soviet prisons and camps. And here's one story that he would tell repeatedly, many times. As the Siberian winter deepened, Hanukkah came, and a group of young Jewish men, all prisoners of the Gulag, convened for a short meeting. The topic was how to obtain and light a secret menorah. One promised to supply margarine to be used as fuel. Some frayed threads from standard issue camp garb would suffice as wicks. Even small cups to hold the margarine were produced from somewhere. Of course, all this was against camp regulations. They all understood the implications of their actions should they be caught. Rab Mordechai was the eldest of the group of 18 men and was therefore honored to usher in the holiday by lighting the first candle. In the dead of night, in a small garden shed, the hardy crew crowded around their makeshift menorah and listened to Rab Mordechai's emotional voice as he recited the first blessings, tears trickling down his cheeks. Rab Mordechai and his comrades gazed silently at the small yellow light, each one recalling Chanukah in his parents' home. But then, the loud crash of the door opening shattered the men's reverie. Camp guards rushed through the doorway and flooded the cramped space. The Jewish inmates were grabbed by brutish hands and shoved through the camp. When they reached a small dark cell, they were ordered to pile inside. The first to be brought to trial was the ringleader, Rab Mordechai himself. Inside the small courtroom, which consisted of the judge's desk and a bench for the defendant, the proceedings were all but pro forma. Remember, this was a kangaroo court, meaning there was only prosecution, no defense. Rab Mordechai had already predicted his indictment and solemnly awaited the verdict. The prosecutor began, "This is an act of treason. By lighting the candles, you intended to signal to enemy forces. The penalty for this is death." The judge regarded the young man standing in front of him. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Rab Mordechai's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the judge. Is it just me, or is it the rest of the group too?" "All of you," enunciated the judge dryly. Rab Mordechai was devastated. The courtroom began to spin around him. Whatever indifference he was able to afford until then vanished in the terror-stricken realization that his fellow brothers would be led to their deaths, and he blamed himself. Rab Mordechai burst into bitter tears, and for a few minutes he stood in front of the judge, sobbing uncontrollably. Years of crushing pain and pent-up emotions overwhelmed him, and he couldn't be stopped. "Come close," said the judge. Rab Mordechai took a few steps toward the judge's desk. Softly, the judge asked him about his relatives, their means of livelihood, and other personal details. Rab Mordechai answered the judge's inquiries. "What do you have to say for yourself?" the judge pressed on. Mustering temerity he did not feel, Rab Mordechai addressed the judge. "We are Jews, and we lit the candles that night to observe the holiday of Chanukah. We've been doing so for thousands of years." "You lit Chanukah candles? You lit Chanukah candles?" the judge repeated to himself, clearly unsettled. "Chanukah candles?" Recomposing himself, the judge called the two guards present in this courtroom and asked them to stand outside. When the door clicked closed, the judge turned his attention back to Rab Mordechai. "If you lit Chanukah candles, let me demonstrate the right way to light them." The Rab Mordechai watched the judge take a small lamp and light it. Picking up the incriminating documents gingerly with trembling hands, the judge slid the first one off and held it to the flame. The paper caught fire and disappeared quickly in an orange blaze and a few wisps of smoke. As if he were afraid to delay lest he change his mind, the judge worked quickly through the pile, saying, "You see, this is how you light Chanukah candles." Soon there was nothing remaining of the pile of incriminating documents. Finishing, the judge scooped up the scattered ashes, strode over to the window, and tossed them into the Siberian wind. Sitting down, the judge reached for the buzzer of his table, and summoned the guards. "Take this group of 18 men," the judge barked, "and separate them, making sure that it would be impossible for them to see one another. There's no point in killing them. They are not worth even one bullet." The guards marched out, and Rab Mordechai was again left alone with the judge. The latter faced Rab Mordechai and said in a trembling voice, "I too am a Jew, and I beg you to make sure that the future generations of our people will know how to light the Chanukah candles." Just to tell you the end of the story of Rab Chanzin, he was able to leave ultimately after Stalin's death in 1956. Him and many thousands, hundreds of thousands of prisoners were pardoned. He was finally able to leave, and then years later, he was able to immigrate to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel, where he was reunited with his brother David, the rabbi of Petach Tikva. And finally, let's share another story. This is another story in Bergen-Belsen with the Blazher Rebbe. In Bergen-Belsen, the eve of Hanukkah, a selection took place. Early in the morning, 3 German commandants, meticulously dressed in their festive black uniforms and visibly high spirits, entered the men's barracks. They ordered the men to stand at the foot of the 3-tiered bunk beds. The selection began. No passports were required, no papers were checked, there was no roll call and no head count. One of the 3 commandants just lifted the index finger in his snow-white glove and pointed in the direction of a pale face while his mouth pronounced the death sentence with one single word, come. Like a barrage of machine gun fire, the German commands, come, come, come. The men were selected and marched outside with his SS guards, with rubber truncheons and iron prods awaited them. They kicked, beat, and tortured the innocent victims. This random selection went on inside the barracks, and the brutal massacre continued outside the barracks until sundown. When the Nazis' black angels of death departed, they left behind heaps of hundreds of tortured and twisted bodies. Then Hanukkah came to Bergen-Belsen. It was time to kindle the Hanukkah lights. A jug of oil was not to be found, no candle was in sight, and the Hanukkah belonged to the distant past. Instead, a wooden clog, the shoe of one of the inmates, became a Hanukkah, strings pulled from a concentration camp uniform, a wick, and the black camp shoe polished pure oil. Not far from the heaps of the bodies, the living skeletons assembled to participate in lighting Hanukkah lights. The Rebbe of Bluzhov, lit the first light and chanted the first 2 blessings in his pleasant voice. And the festive melody was filled with sorrow and pain. When he was about to recite the 3rd blessing, Shechiyanu, he stopped, turned his head, and looked around as if he were searching for something. But immediately he turned his face back to the quivering small lights and in a strong, reassuring, comforting voice chanted the 3rd blessing, Baruch atah Hashem, L'keinu melech haolam, Shechiyanu v'kimonu v'giyanu l'zman hazeh. God has kept us alive and has preserved us, enabled us to reach this time, this season. Among the people present at the kindling of the lights was a Mr. Zamiechkowski, one of the leaders of the Warsaw Bund. He was a clever, sincere person with a passion for discussing matters of religion, faith, and truth. Even here in the camp at Bergen-Belsen, his passion for discussion did not abate. And he was a skeptic. He never missed an opportunity to engage in such a conversation. As soon as the Rebbe of Bluzhov had finished the ceremony of kindling the lights, this Zamiechkowski elbowed his way to the Rebbe and said, Spira, that's how he called him, you're a clever and honest man. I can understand your need to light Hanukkah candles, even in these wretched times. I could even understand the 2nd blessing. But the 3rd blessing, how could you say, thank you for keeping us alive and preserving us to this season, when hundreds of dead bodies and thousands are literally lying out there dead? This is what you're thankful for, to keeping us alive? And the Rebbe answered, you're 100% right, Zamiechkowski. When I reached the 3rd blessing, I also hesitated and asked myself, what should I do with this blessing? I turned my head in order to ask the rabbi of Zaner and other distinguished rabbis who were standing near me if indeed I might recite this blessing. But just as I was turning my head, I noticed that behind me a throng was standing, a large crowd of living Jews, their faces expressing faith, devotion, and concentration, as they were listening to the rite of the kindling of the Hanukkah lights. I said to myself, if God has such a nation at times like these, even in the worst of times, they're standing and doing everything possible, even when the heaps of bodies of their beloved fathers, brothers, and sons are dead around them, and they're standing here, despite all that, listening to the blessing, the bracha of Hanukkah candles, the Yom Mehim Bizman Hazeh, then I am under such an obligation to recite the 3rd blessing. Some years after the liberation, the Rabbi of Bluzhov was residing in Brooklyn, New York. He received regards from Mr. Zamiechkowski. Zamiechkowski asked his son of the Skabiner Rebbe to tell Israel Spira, the Rebbe of Bluzhov, that the answer he gave him that dark Hanukkah night in Bergen-Belsen has stayed with him ever since and was a constant source of inspiration during hard and troubled times. Story heard directly from them. I want to wish everyone a very Freiliche Hanukkah and a good Chodesh, coming from Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, when the 3 Sefer Torahs were taken out for Shabbos, for Rosh Chodesh, and for Hanukkah. It says, Sefer HaCholos from Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, that's a special gula that opens up gates of blessings. This is a time to ask for everything that we need. And it's Bodek Menusa, we're told. that it will work. Everyone have a good Tavach. We will continue next Mitzvah Shabbos 10 o'clock with the learning of Tanya. A good Tavach and a Freilich and Chanukah.
This has been My Life Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.